I have the honor to seek approval of Senate Resolution number 816 under Committee Report 315 entitled Resolution Concurring in the Ratification of Convention 189 concerning decent work for domestic workers, adopted by the International Labor Organization in June 2011 under the chairmanship of the Philippine government. ILO Convention 189 does not seek anything out of the ordinary from governments and those who employ domestic workers. It merely moves to acknowledge that domestic workers, like us, have fundamental rights that we need to respect. ILO 189 is underscores the fact that domestic workers, like many other workers, must enjoy the same mantle of basic rights such as reasonable hours of work, weekly rest, clear information on terms and conditions of employment, and freedom of association. If we ratify 189, our advocacy for the rights of our domestic workers abroad is given unfettered meaning. This will bring into our doorsteps the mandate to provide for our domestic workers what we ask other countries to provide for them when they work overseas. We cannot demand what we do not provide. Thus, I ask this chamber to join me in putting our country's stamp on the concurrence of ILO 189. It is only in doing so that we can genuinely say that we care for more than the 3 million domestic workers, many of whom serve as the sole breadwinners of families. Without adequate protection, we are consequently condemning their families to an uncertain future. Allow me to share with you some of the realities that characterize the world of unprotected domestic workers. Domestic work, as you all know, is rendered at home. It's very close and oftentimes alienated work environment, making the work relationship between employer and domestic worker intimate on a daily basis. And domestic workers are mostly women, sometimes even minors, and they account for the highest percentage being deployed for work abroad. In the local front, households that employ domestic workers are concentrated in the wealthiest 10 to 20% of the national income distribution. Domestic workers are not nameless persons. They have families. They send siblings to school. They work just like us. But unlike us, many of them are denied their rights and stripped of their dignity as human beings. Let me share with you a case that is mirrored many times over by the experiences for domestic workers overseas. Let's call her by the name of Lourdes. She signed up to work as a domestic worker in Jordan. She was just short of her 22nd birthday when she left her village in northern Luzon in 2006. Like most migrant domestic workers heading for the Middle East, she packed a roll-on bag stuffed with clothing. She brought along a mobile phone, borrowed from her aunt, hoping that this would be the lifeline for her loved ones at home. Her employer resented that she brought a mobile phone. The employer must have thought that when she hired Lourdes, she had also brought her liberty. Like most foreign domestics, Lourdes was barred from having contact with the outside world. And one fateful day, Lourdes fell 4 stories from the kitchen veranda, landing squarely on her back. As a young woman lay in coma in a Jordanian hospital, her employer claimed it was a suicide attempt. But her family claimed that she was thrown off the balcony. The woman employer was arrested, charged with assault, and now she is a quadriplegic, and she fought a losing battle. These are modern cases of modern-day slavery. Hundreds of them untold, that they permeate in the world of domestic helpers. Child domestic workers, Mr. President, also abound. Many of them are found in exploitative and slave-like conditions. The Cebu DSWD revealed that 90 or 80% of the reported victims of rape, attempted rape, and other acts of sexual abuse involve child domestic workers. Horrific stories of abuse of adult domestic workers also abound. The violations are usually in the form of long working hours with no rest period, non-payment of wages, or below poverty threshold wages. Verbal abuse, physical abuse, sexual abuse, psychological abuse, name it, and these abuses abound in every story that is told of these domestic workers, some of whom are child workers. ILO Convention 189 effectively recognizes domestic workers as part of the formal economy, paving the way for the entitlement to minimum standards and protection. Filipino migrant workers are bound to benefit the most from the ratification of 189. The convention will ensure domestic workers that they are able to keep in their possession the travel and identity documents to encourage member states to set standards for employment agencies. The convention provides an opportunity for the Philippines as a sending country to enter into bilateral, regional, or multilateral agreements that prevent abusers and fraudulent practices. 2 years ago, the Senate passed on third reading Senate Bill 78, which the Senate President pro tempore knows very much about as the chairman of the Labor Committee. It was sponsored by Senator Jigoy Estrada, and the House passed it as well on second reading in May of 2012. I hope it will not be long before a new minimum labor standard for domestic workers becomes a reality, because this bill, by then, hopefully, would have become a law. Mr. President, recently, Uruguay ratified ILO 189. The convention requires 2 of the ILO member states to ratify the instrument before it takes effect. Our concurrence with the convention will signal the start of a regime where more than 100 million domestic workers all over the world will no longer have to remain undervalued and unprotected. Mr. President, distinguished colleagues, let us lead others in making decent, dignified work a reality for all domestic workers. I ask you to join me in concurring in the ratification of ILO Convention 189. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. President. May we now